Hello, dear friends. It is Dr. Sarah. Today, I want to talk to you about eating for your brain. I want to discuss how we can sort through some of the conflicting information on brain and body health and how food can nourish the brain while keeping it somewhat simple. This is because in the current era, it is so easy to access an abundance of wellness information with just one click. We have artificial intelligence, we have social media, we have the internet, we have podcasts, we have blogs, we have research. And all of these sources offer plentiful education and a variety of perspectives on different wellness topics. What I want to do in this video is explore how too much information can make it hard to find accurate information. I also want to discuss some of the undeniable evidence of how food can be medicine for both the brain and the body, and what to avoid for better brain health. I've made it an intention of mine to skip the dietary controversies, such as carnivore versus vegan, or low carb versus high carb, or keto versus if we should actually consume glucose. I want to focus instead on understanding how food affects the brain based on its biochemical and biological needs. And I also want to highlight how our food supply influences nutritional content that we feed our brain. So, what we're going to do is cover some modern day focuses on lifestyle medicine and how it is gaining momentum and why this is important to this topic. The factors that make it so hard to sort out through and find the accurate health information amongst the vast of different resources that we have, how the brain is impacted by nutrition, what foods to actually avoid for better cognitive health. And I just want to talk a little bit on food insecurity because I think this is an important concept within this whole topic that is often being ignored. So the good news is before we start, we don't have to be restrictive. We don't have to be obsessive about food for our brain and our body to function optimally. We just have to take some simple steps to avoid harmful substances while adding in versus taking away foods that form foundational building blocks for our brain to function. As always, all the references and resources will be in the links in the resource section in the accompanying article. And in the upcoming video following this one, we're going to talk about some top foods and actually get more specific about how to fuel metabolic brain health. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk about this modern day focus on lifestyle and health and why it's important. So right now we're kind of in a transition period in America. There's a lot of focus on the influence of lifestyle and environmental factors on our health. We're moving away more from the genetic focus, the pharmaceutical focus, and into what we can do to empower our health in different choices that we make every day. A lot of this has to do with what's going on in the White House. Recently, the Make America Healthy Again MAHA committee released its MAHA report on what is fueling chronic childhood diseases. They cited a range of contributing factors. These included poor diet, an accumulation of environmental toxins, insufficient physical activity, chronic stress, and over-medicalization. The report raised both concerns as well as praise. Now, some supporters even became critical because they claimed it didn't go far enough. And on the other side, we had outright opponents that said it went too far. And we even had allies and opponents questioning the citations and scientific rigor. Regardless of the hot debate of the specific content, many Americans do agree in broad terms that we need to make our country healthier again. And this is an actual welcome unification. It's refreshing because our country is so divided along political lines on so many other topics. So I think it's important to remember that all of this attention, food has been highlighted a lot, and it is an important contributor to health, but we also have to remember it is one factor in health. With all this knowledge now that diet has an impact on health outcomes, many are still confused though on what to eat because of the contradictory messages that are out there. And this is because there's extreme polar opposite advice from various dietary experts or different social influencers on what they do and what they think will help everyone. So let's talk about why this is hard for people who may not have a PhD in research and how to find the truth here and sort through all of the inaccuracies. Well, there's there's different factors here. We have the conflicting opinions of experts. We have contrary research findings that get reported in the news media and also in research papers. And then we have diet culture, which is influencing healthcare. Diet culture is something that is actually advocating for thinness and fitness and health as a moral virtue. And it is actually maybe causing a little more harm than good because rather than focusing on health as a means to a better life, it's focusing on health is the means to a better life. And that's an important distinction. But if we look at kind of the case at point, how can we find some accurate information? There's some things to consider when sorting through different headlines or different things that you read. First of all, we have to look at misinformation versus a good education. So, are people just informing you about certain things and they're not really backing up things with studies and saying that this is misinformation without actually citing claims? Or are they actually saying, this is not the case and here's why, or this is the case and here's why, and citing some objective resources? We also have unintentional and intentional biases in research and study findings. These can be related to the funding. Even good studies run the risk of various biases and unaccounted for what they call co-founders, which is things the researchers didn't think about that could affect the results that actually do. So we can't control for everything in an experiment. We also have incomplete and inaccurate data reporting from attention grabbing highlights. So sometimes what happens in the media or oftentimes they'll grab one line in a study and they won't actually read the whole study and it'll blow it up into various claims that aren't necessarily scientifically valid or preliminary or even just misinformation in order to get more readers. We also have misleading and cherry-picked claims from experts, which means they're telling the truth on their side, but not necessarily the whole truth by bringing in opposing viewpoints with science, because we know in nutrition we have sides to support both, right? So these are things to consider. So what I'd like to do is bring it back to the basics. How does the brain function biochemically, biologically? What does the brain need and what are those nutrients? And if we look at that, then it's easy to kind of read the studies with that filter, okay? So let's look at how food actually feeds the brain. Now, we have the science of nutrigenomics, which is studying how different nutrients influence how our genes respond, okay? So they don't change our genetics, but they actually impact how our cells respond to the environment. So we know that if our cells are bathed in metabolites from broccoli, those cells are going to send out different signals than if our cells are bathed in different signaling molecules from additives or chemicals from synthetic foods. And this is supported through years of epidemiological research, which means they're followed over studies of people consuming different diets over time. So it's hard to claim that diet does not impact our physical, cognitive, or brain health. And it's hard to claim that different kinds of diets don't or different nutrients, though some people actually still are. That's getting harder to. There was an article in Nutrition Review that discussed food on the brain, and it gives several examples of how nutrition impacts brain function in 5 distinct ways. So the authors state that the performance of the human brain is based on an interplay between inherited genotype and external environmental factors, including diet. So we know this is this nature-nurture interplay here. Food and nutrition are essential in the maintenance of brain performance. They also aid in the prevention and treatment of mental disorders. Both the overall composition of the human diet and specific dietary components, they say, have been shown to impact brain function in various experimental models and those epidemiological studies, long word, that I talked about. The narrative provides an overview of 5 key areas on brain function related to mental health and performance. And this includes how diet impacts brain development, signaling networks and neurotransmitters in the brain, cognition and memory, the balance between protein formation and degradation, and deteriorative effects due to chronic inflammatory processes. And then they talk about the role of epigenetics, which is changing how, again, our cells function based on what we put into the body or what we're exposed to. So brain development, signaling networks, and neurotransmitters are affected by diet. Most people are probably aware of that. Probably heard of folate, you probably heard of precursors to serotonin are found in proteins. We need different nutrients to help with cognition and memory. We need cells that no longer are functioning correctly to die out and to sweep that up. And then we need different building blocks to help build up different regions in cellular metabolism as well. This is the protein part. And then we need protection, such as antioxidants, to help with the detrimental effects of inflammatory processes. So all of these are important for if we look at brain health and how food is impacted by it. Another area that influences mental health is the gut-brain interaction. So this link describes how the microbiome, which is a name for the residential belly bugs and other genetics living in our guts, and how they communicate with and provide feedback to the brain, the gut-brain link. This is through the metabolites and various compounds that they produce and the signaling pathways through this long vagus nerve that goes up to the brain. And it's known that the microbiome is actually shaped by our diet and our lifestyle. So these are key concepts on how food can impact the brain and our mood. And that's all fine and good, but now what do we eat, right? Knowing all of this. So just in this video, I'm going to go to one specific topic, which is how to prevent the nutritional interventions that we're going to talk about later from being utilized effectively. And I want to specifically talk about chemicals and additives because the MAHA report pointed out that some of the damage to our health is coming from our food supply, and it had references for that. And it's through the cumulative harmful chemical exposure in our environment through these herbicides, these pesticides, and insecticides, and from the chemicals and additives, which have not been adequately studied for safety and have been shown to have negative impacts on children's brain and health as well as adults. So I know that this kind of revived the controversy surrounding the role of eating organic food versus conventional ones for overall health. There's a variety of reasons why this is a controversy, because the research regarding the superiority of nutritional content of organic foods, it's not as top-notch as hoped for, though it is there. But I think it's important to remember what is not in organic foods that might be even more critical, and that's these toxins. So anytime we take in chemicals, what happens is they create additional strain on our body and our systems to remove them. It can cause inflammation in our brain and our body, and that creates a cascade of negative events. The nutrients we need to support the brain also help the body to help detoxify these different chemicals, optimizing biotransformation. Unfortunately, many struggle with nutrient deficiencies already related to the current manufacturing processes of our food system, for one. This compounds a stress on the body and the brain to be fueled and function optimally because the nutrients are getting sidetracked to help our body survive, right? To get rid of toxins. So to enhance nutrient density, it's often helpful to avoid substances that can counteract the benefits of nourishing foods. So that being said, let's talk about some of the suggestions on how to lower our chemical input to raise the benefits of nourishment to our brain. And I've pulled these from our Keeping It Green series in a previous video series I did, and I will have the link for that in the accompanying article. So one of the first things to do is to choose organic or low pesticide residue as much as possible when you're making your specific food choices. It'll ensure the least amount of chemicals in your food. Now, finances are an issue. You can prioritize avoiding the dirty dozen or the top produce items with the highest amount of pesticides. It changes year to year, but you can find it on the Environmental Working Group website, EWG. Also, another thing to do is if you're going to consume fish, to choose low mercury fish. And that's because mercury is a potent neurotoxin and fish carry mercury. So the best choices for receiving the benefits of seafood while having a low risk of harm include sardines, anchovies, and small varieties of salmon, and incidentally, making sure that you have adequate selenium levels because that helps with the toxicity. You also want to use glass instead of plastic, and this is to avoid BPA or other plasticizers actually leaching into your food. It's especially important if you're using a microwave. You can add in delicious and medicinal foods in your diet to enhance detoxification. So this is again where the nutrients are sidelined. You can choose your favorite cruciferous vegetables, whether you like broccoli or cauliflower. I like both. And they have compounds in there that enhance detoxification. They even aid in hormone balance. They can assist with heart health and provide phytonutrients and fibers to feed our microbiome. So there's a lot of different things that these cruciferous vegetables can do that help our brain and our body. Eating these foods, which are fiber rich, also decrease levels of POPs, which are persistent organic pollutants. We also can sweat because sweat reduces heavy metals and toxins that may accumulate from consumption. And this is through sauna or movement. You can consider chelators. Now, these are things that actually serve to bind toxins and aid the release of them through the elimination pathways, but you want to check with your doctor on that. You don't want to create more nutritional deficiencies with binders. And then, of course, we can use essential oils because they have antioxidant protection and they help promote detoxification. A toothpick to 1 drop is the amount that you can actually put in a lot of recipes to help with flavor. So, all of that being said, when we talked about how it's hard to find good information right now on what to eat, but if we look at some of the basics of how food can help to fuel the brain, we can kind of wheel that in onto how we can support our brain health using our fork. And then we talked about things that we can do to avoid the chemicals that trump our attempts to nourish our brain. I just want to talk a little bit on the fact that we talked about organic foods and having cleaner versions with less chemicals. Ultimately, right now, unfortunately, that means that these foods are likely more expensive. So, this is an area that's often ignored. Organic, regenerative, and wholesome foods can be hard to obtain in certain regional areas, and they can be hard to access for those in social economic classes that are lower. And food insecurity in itself is actually a health risk factor and can negatively impact the brain and microbiome. So, for these reasons, we have to remember that access to nutrient dense foods for the brain and body health is more than an individual choice, but we can take action to support this for everyone. And so, those who can afford to can purchase higher quality foods. This brings the prices down, the concept of supply and demand. We can advocate to our reps to create public health policies to subsidize healthy foods. We can stop moralizing food and judging others harshly if they aren't eating as healthy as we think they should, because this creates stigma, which causes inflammation in the body and of itself. And we can acknowledge that excess lifestyle and many other factors also influence people's food choices, and food is only one factor in overall wellness. All right. So to sum this all up, there was a lot we covered today. It is undeniable that food influences our brain and our physical health. And the recent focus on lifestyle factors that impact our wellness has fueled many to pay more attention on their diet. But there's a lot of conflicting information and a lot of just information in general. So it's hard to know where to start if one wants to optimize their cognitive function. So that's why we went through one of the best ways to start is to actually understand how the brain functions and how nourishment actually affects brain optimization and to avoid things that can harm our brain in order to get the most from our nutrition. And what this means is doing our best to not consume foods with high amounts of pesticides, herbicides, and other chemicals and additives. But we also need to keep in mind food insecurity and socioeconomic factors of healthy eating. So I hope that you found this information helpful. And I'd love to hear what you've learned about eating for your brain and sorting through all these different health information. And I will go through some top foods for metabolic brain health in a following video. I also want to let you know that I am obsessed with brain health because I believe that brain health is one of the keys to optimizing our overall health. Because if you don't have a highly functioning brain and it's not creating the right output of what to do, it's going to be hard to do it. So you might know that you can eat healthier and you might want to, but your brain might be trumping your attempts. So I do have an upcoming mind, body, spirit transformation project. And I do have a free webinar on how that brings in the concept of brain health and how that can help to overlap how to achieve the transformation you want in all different areas of your health. So be sure to subscribe and to stay tuned for updates on that. And it is a first come, first serve webinar because there's a limited amount of spaces. The date is to be announced, but right now you can register and sign up. And once those slots are filled, we will start the webinar and I will let people know when the date is who have signed up. Okay, so thank you so much for taking the time to nurture your mind, body, and spirit and soul. And I want to send you many blessings.